Is life not giving you what you want? Well, you can do a few different things about that. Number one, you could just kind of throw a tantrum, get really upset. You could rebel against the situation that you're dealing with. Is that necessarily going to make your situation better? Um, Maybe so, maybe not. Let's talk about the maybe so bit first, right? So if you do decide you're going to throw a tantrum, well, you'll likely find yourself in a position where you're rebelling against the way things are working out. Eventually, you'll likely find that really the way things are working out are kind of in your own best interest in the first place. And so, probably at that point, you'll decide, okay, maybe what I want is not necessarily the best thing for me after all. So then you make a change, you make a shift, and you begin to switch things in a different direction where you align more with what you need. And then you have the maybe not. So why won't it work out in your best interest? Well, do you really want to put up with all that stuff? Right? So you have a choice ahead of time. You can approach the entire situation from a completely different perspective, which is you could decide to take a sobering look at how what you perhaps want is maybe not the best thing for you in the first place. And perhaps what's going on, which is not necessarily what you want, is really the best thing for you, right? It's interesting because basically all the nakshatras, which are, as per Vimshotri Dasha, connected with Venus, are Ugra and Krura, which means they're cruel and they're violent. And it's interesting because they all relate to wanting fulfillment on one level or another. And that makes complete sense as per Venus. But it's interesting that they're all cruel and violent, which means on a certain level, it makes it feel to us as if our desires are not being fulfilled. And that's because we need to understand that quite often the desires that we have don't coincide with those things which ultimately would bring us the greatest level of fulfillment from life. It's just that we get caught in our head and the brain games that our brain plays on us by creating all these desires, all these fantasies, all these ways of envisioning things, which ultimately may not be as realistic as we assess in the first place. So what can we do in those particular situations? Well, we can take a different look at things. And when we take a different look at things, it helps us to see things from a clearer perspective. Now, on the 10th of July, Venus is going to begin its transit through Purva Phalguni Nakshatra, which is a nakshatra that's associated with Venus. As it's doing this, it's going to be shifting its energy away from its connection with Rahu, where it's been in closer proximity with. That alone is going to enable a deeper and clearer look at a situation. But at the same time that that's happening, Venus is closing in on an aspect with Saturn, which is in Purva Ashadha Nakshatra, which is also a Venus-associated nakshatra. And Purva Ashadha Nakshatra tends to have this, I want to use the word humbling level to its energy. It makes us confront the ego. It makes us look at how perhaps we're the cause of our own dissatisfaction in the first place, and how by not being true to ourselves, we begin to place all these things within our own path, which ultimately lead to our own frustration and our own tension. When in reality, we can make a decision to work more in harmony with ourselves. But the problem is we get stuck in life's struggles to the extent that we begin to think that something that is not really good for us is ultimately to our benefit. Right? So let me give you an example, right? So we could find ourselves in a position where we can go, right, I would really like to have that, several $1,000 car, right? And we build up this desire, we build up this this fantasy of like envisioning ourselves in that like luxury car and how that's going to make our lives better. Or we can envision ourselves in this like luxury, wonderful job that gives us a lot of status and a lot of power, right? And we envision all these things and we begin to apply our energy towards like thinking that those things are ultimately going to be the best for us. But what if you had that like really wonderful job? Well, maybe you'd have to like move away from all your friends and you wouldn't really be in the happiest position. Or maybe your friends would kind of begin to go, oh goodness, I'm not sure about this person now because they're not really being the person who they were beforehand, right? Well, or maybe you might find yourself in a position where working that job means that you don't have any time for your family. And let's say you got that like multi-thousand-dollar car. Well, maybe the second day after you have that car, you drive it and you wrap it around a telephone pole and you end up in the hospital, right? So sometimes what we think that we want is not necessarily what we need. And sometimes we're being given what we need all the time. Only we don't know how to align ourselves with what we want because we're so stuck in thinking what we want is going to be better for us, when ultimately it's not. Okay? Now, a certain level of that is healthy because when we have those desires, when we have that want, even if that want goes unfulfilled, then we begin to move ourselves in the direction that brings all those experiences into our lives that teach us ultimately about what we need. Now, a few days after Venus shifts into Purva Phalguni Nakshatra, Jupiter is going to station direct. Now, Jupiter's in Vishaka Nakshatra. Vishaka Nakshatra, I often like to, if I had to like wrap up the feeling tone of a nakshatra into like one sentence, Vishaka Nakshatra quite often has this energy where one foot is in the future and another foot is in the past. So how does that tie in with this Venus and Purva Phalguni energy? Well, part of you recognizes where you would like for your life to ultimately head. Another part of you is perhaps concerned about the responsibilities that would be involved in moving your life in that particular direction. Okay, so with this Venus and Purva Phalguni energy, there are these things that you think that you want for your life, for the future. There are these ways that you think it would be more beneficial for you to live your life, right? But as you go through this particular experience, and as you go through moving your energy towards trying to realize these particular things, some interesting things begin to happen. You begin to recognize that, right, doing X means Y. Doing A means D. When initially I thought that doing X meant Z, and initially when I thought that doing A meant C. And so we think that one set of conditions, pardon me, means another set of conditions. And when we realize what actually would be involved through us having our desires fulfilled, we recognize that our heart is not really behind that in the first place. So all these energies, I should throw into the equation that Mars is retrograde and approaching a closer conjunction with Ketu, both in Shravana Nakshatra. This is causing you to re-examine the path ahead, to re-examine what it is that you really want. Now, Purva Phalguni Nakshatra, I like to describe to people as being about the contract that you have with yourself, right? You can either set up a life for you that's in agreement with your soul, or you can set up a life for yourself that's in agreement with your ego. If you begin to set up more of a life for yourself in these coming days that's more in agreement with your ego rather than in agreement with your soul, you're likely going to find that those experiences bring somewhat of an eye-opening set of conditions to you that begin to make you realize just exactly what it is that you really need. When that happens, you have a choice. You can either go kicking and screaming until ultimately you're going to get taken in the direction of what you really need, or you can go, maybe what I really want is what I really need. And that's the idea that you need to align yourself with. That is, if you want to make your life a whole lot easier. And if you would like to make your whole life a whole lot easier, I'd be happy to help you with the steps that can help to take you in that particular direction. All you would need to do in that particular situation is to schedule an astrological service with me. Those can be scheduled through the astrological services page of my website, which you should see a link to above right about now. That's going to do it for this look at Venus's transit through Purva Phalguni Nakshatra from the 10th of July to the 24th of July, 2018. Until next time, please do take the very best care of yourself. Bye now.